So, hello, Professor Stookie, and whoever else is watching this. This is episode 83 of the Conscious Cast.
Yes, sir.
Which is Cal's podcast. Look at him.
And your podcast.
He looks handsome as ever, doesn't he? Today's episode is a little fancy episode because I'm doing it for an assignment. But also, you're all going to get a great idea what Cal's perspective is, specifically on capitalism.
Sure.
And so, I'll give you the quick rundown on my project. But again, the way that, my professor is talking about it, she's talking about it in a way where, she wants the conversation to be free-flowing. So express your ideas, have some structure, that's kind of where my job's going to be. But my job is to dig and see what you think, see how you feel, see what your experiences are with capitalism and a bunch of different aspects of it. I have a little diagram I can show you to kind of give you a good idea of what we're talking about. And if you are interested to see my perspective, which is awful because I don't know anything. Well, okay, after this class, I know a lot more.
Yeah.
But, a year ago when you interviewed me, because you took this class last year, my responses were very like, I don't know what I'm talking about, but this is what I
thought you had a good perspective.
Well, it's my 2 cents, but it's based on
course.
philosophy and psychology rather than real experience with politics or following anything like that. So,
nor am I like a big politician or
yes, Cal is mostly into philosophy. So much of his ideas, I'm assuming, we'll see, but I'm assuming will be coming from
a
philosophical perspective.
Yeah, man. I don't know what I'm going to say, but we're good.
Yeah, but we'll see.
Yeah,
all right.
Sure, man.
All right. So, let's give the gist of the idea. Specifically for the final project, I am asking you to facilitate a discussion about how the political economy, capitalist democracy, in parentheses, with a small group of people and write a paper in which you summarize their thoughts and kinds of issues that we've been discussing in class. Introduce the discussion by explaining that the goal of the conversation is to share experiences and ideas about the economy and society that play important roles in our lives and society, but which we don't often discuss explicitly.
Absolutely.
You should also reassure them that no names or identifying details will be used in your report. This is Callahan Borse. He lives at Central Connecticut State University.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
Just
a full-on video of every single thing I'm saying.
So here is our graph. I already know what it is because you had it last year.
Yeah, throw it up on the screen too.
Yes, I can. It's right here. Ding! Capital, government, labor, business, production of value, and then the spew off of that is profit, taxes, and wages, which are subcategorized by highs and lows for wages. All right. So I think honestly that where I want to start with this is what is your idea of capital? Like how would you define capitalism?
Capital. Yeah, so I mean, my best understanding of it is the privatization of wealth, right? And so, obviously, a lot of the funding that different businesses receive, it comes from.
It's closed.
We're good.
For those of you that don't know, I spilled coffee on this freaking thing, this whole setup like 3 times.
Yeah, no. So essentially, it's from my understanding, it's the privatization of wealth. So we have a free economy, right? Open market, quote unquote, where we can come up with different products and services where we can sell these things, right? And through our own public dollar, kind of purchase them, right? And so we can kind of privatize our own wealth, right? So we're not given all of our necessities and things of that nature by the government, right? So like more of like I guess you could say like a communist kind of type of going about things, right? So we have ability of our own where we can purchase things through our own private funding that, yes, part of it is taken out from in terms of taxes, right, and goes back into public funding and things like that. But the best of my understanding of it is, it's the privatization of wealth. It's about, really about the free market, free economy, and it breeds, competitiveness between different businesses. It's all about, really just like that kind of innovative, competitive edge between businesses. And on that basis, they're able to really compete against one another. And it's just kind of like this they're always just trying to scale and scale and scale and scale and scale. And so, yeah, that's pretty much
your
take on it.
Got it. So you talked about a couple different components there. What were the ones you said? You said
like the privatization of wealth.
Privatization of wealth, and you said 2 other things.
Like competitive Sure, no.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Public funding.
What I'm getting at here is I want you to talk about your experience with each of those things.
Yeah.
And you know, you don't need to talk about exactly whatever you talked about.
Sure.
But you know, what is your experience with each of these kind of, you know, I don't, you know, I feel like categories of capitalism is a bad way to put it, but I guess that might be the best way to put it. What's your experience with that? With government, with labor, and with capital?
I mean, my own personal experience, like see, this is the thing. Like for me personally, like I believe we should, you know, move away from a capitalistic system, right? Like, and so meaning I think we should still have elements of capitalism, right? But I think we should look towards more of like a small, there shouldn't be as much centralization as there currently is, because like,
what do you mean by that?
Centralization in terms of we have kind of like an overarching government, you know, that regulates the economy, right? And so it's like we should have more local based economies, right? Where different consumers can really, you know, purchase and build their own like little local economy rather than having like a broad overscale of like, this is Texas. Obviously there has to be some type of form of centralization, right? In terms of, I guess you could say, who's like running things and things of that nature, right? But it's more so like how Russell Brand puts it. It's like a more of like I believe he said like, it's like an archaic kind of, government, like where it's not an anarchy, right, where people could just do whatever they want, right? It's a limited anarchy where people are able to, you know, form their own communities and form this own kind of their own basis of like the economy, right? And so in that sense, they're really able to, you know, develop their own values, develop their own way of life, right? And they're not necessarily so, I guess you could say, attached and not necessarily forced, but into these. And we kind of do have like our own different economies, like with, you know, the state government and, you know, the federal government. But it's, to me, like in my own personal experience with capitalism, right? It's been good for me, right? Like I've never personally, from what I've like experienced, right? Like I'm a very privileged individual from where I have grown up, like how I've been able to, you know, from my 22 years here on Earth, it's been very good to me. But from my research, you know, on a more broad scale, it seems that, you know, in capitalism, since like, you know, a lot of times the bottom line is profit, you know, when it comes to things such as health, when it comes to things such as what's actually needed, like, you know, in terms of environmental change, like I'm sure you talked about it before, like triple bottom line before, a lot like people, planet, profit, right? So it's starting to change, but I think capitalism, since it's just so ingrained with, you know, that dollar sign, it really forces certain issues to never be solved, right? Even though they may appear to be solved, right? So for instance, we have like environmental issues, right? That are going on. Like, I mean, the planet is really, really messed up, like really bad, right? And so but a lot of companies, like, you know, they're starting to like, quote unquote, go more green, you know, and there's different companies that are like taking more sustainable measures, but from the research that I've done, it's not nearly enough of what they want to do. Like I was talking to you about this the other day, like in order for them to like really start, for instance, saving the planet, or, you know, for instance, really not, or help people with their health, you know, like you can look at this in the pharmaceutical industry, you can look at this at different, you know, other areas. They really need to, I mean, there has to be a complete flip, right? Like there has to be drastic systematic change, right? And so I think, in my opinion, capitalism is, you know, there's a lot of great elements there that I think, you know, should definitely carry on, you know, such as like that competitive edge, you know, that innovation, right? Like that's one of the great things that it brings, but it also just drives people to this greedy extent that when it comes to things like the pandemic, when people really need to be helped, or when it comes to things like the environment, when there really needs to be change, and who knows how much time we have left here on planet Earth, according to my previous environmental teacher, he thinks we only have like 20 years left here on Earth, and he's like, he thinks we're doomed, right? It's like, which, you know, I think if you really look at the broad scale of things, like I think there's a lot of truth in that. But drawing back onto it, like my own personal experience with capitalism, you know, it has been fine, you know, like, because I've been able to progress, I've been able to kind of live the American dream, right? But that's, and I've been able to, luckily for me, grow up in this kind of meritocracy, right? Like where it's not all based on luck, right? Or it's not all based on hard work, right? Like there's definitely some luck factors in there, like, and it's allowed me to, because I have the resources, I have the opportunities, and I have things of that nature, right? But for a lot of significant other people, like just based on the society we live in, that, you know, it brings advantages to some and disadvantages to others. Like it's a really tough spot, and that meritocracy is an illusion for a large part. And I think like that's also bringing in that democracy aspect too, as well as that capitalism aspect. So I think on a more broad scale, personally for me, it's been fine, but from the research I've done on a more broad scale, it's definitely, I think there's some issues there for sure.
So why are you for, or what's a better way to put this? Why are you against an overemphasis and overuse of centralization?
Because I think, well, at least from the research I've done, it causes people to live under one umbrella, right? And so a lot of times
Can you give an example?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if you look at things like the pharmaceutical industry, right? Mm-hmm. And so you look at the pandemic, right? And so a lot of times what would happen is, you know, and this is kind of getting into my own personal opinion, right? Like a lot of people such as Russell Brand, Julian Assange say, you know, and a lot of other independent journalists, right, say there's a revolving door between, you know, Washington, the media, and big business, right? Mm-hmm. And so like they're all on the same page, right? So this centralization where there's this kind of just this like one say over everything, right? It doesn't allow for external voices to really be heard, right? And so it doesn't allow for things such as a democracy, right? Where, you know, you have your opinion, right? You have your say, right? And you believe, according to like the representative, that your voice can really be heard, mm-hmm. right? Like that kind of like that idea of that centralization, right? You look at this like the global reset, for instance, right? And it's like there's this in Davos, right? It's all these billionaires. They go to this thing and they discuss how they're going to change the world, right? And they discuss some great things there, mm-hmm. for sure, right? But they're all talking about it from a perspective of how it's going to benefit them the most, right? And it's not about, in my opinion at least, it's not about helping local normal people. It's about how can they further their interests, right? How can they have more control? How can they further their bottom line, right? And so it's just like, for instance, like I was saying before, like back in the pandemic, right? You look at things like innocent doctors would be talking about, you know, things, and they would be for vaccines, right? They would be for all these things, mm-hmm. but they would say, in addition to this, he's like, you should be helping your health. You should be doing all these things, such as natural immunity, right? Like all these different things. Like he's like, I know this one doctor that I've walked, I think it's Dr. Sunil Dan, right? He administered like COVID vaccines. He administered all these things, right? Mm-hmm. And he was for vaccines, and he was like, if you think you need it, right? If you think you're in a spot where you're vulnerable, you know, if you're in that like risk group, like you should get it, right? But he's like, he also said, at the same time too, he's just like, well, back in the beginning of the pandemic, he got COVID, right? Mm-hmm. And so based on he had natural immunity, right? And so he didn't end up getting the vaccine, right? And so that was based on his own personal case, right? And I'm not saying what's right, I'm not saying what's wrong here, but when, like I was saying before, when this centralization, right, like between big business, media, and the government, right, they outcast these opinions and narratives that don't necessarily fit into their way of going about things, right? And what allows them to further their interests, right? So Dr. Sunil Dan, right, was speaking the truth, was speaking factual information. And so he ended up getting nearly banned off YouTube, right? He ended up moving off to like, I don't know if it was locals.com. So he would get like hate comments and all these different types of things by people for him. Just, yeah, dude. I mean, like doctors that have been in the field for 20 years, dude, like, and are just so noble. And it's just like, wild. They take the, I forget something oath that like the doctors take, right? And it's just like so many doctors have just become corrupted by things such as profit, right? Where they don't actually care about people's health, but they care about furthering their own interests, right?
So fear of losing their jobs.
Yeah, exactly, man. So I think kind of drawing it back to like the centralization, right? So it's just, I know that was kind of like a long-winded example, right? But essentially what I'm saying there is with this centralization, right? It allows for people to not have their voices heard. It allows for people in power to stay in power, right? Because they have power, right? Like they have the ability, right? They have the money, and money, like you know, determines your ability to do things, right? And so who do you think's more likely to have their opinion heard, right? 100%. One of, like in Connecticut, right? Like we have, I believe, I don't know, I know we have, I forget how many representatives we have. We have 2 senators, right? Mm-hmm. So who do you think's more likely to be heard? a person, one of the, like, let's just say a local group, right, that wants, you know, more vegan policies to be in place, or a big pharma company that is, oh, dude, I forget the term. What's it called? Like lobbying. That is lobbying one of our senators. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Who do you think's more likely to be heard? Who do you think's more likely to...
laughable.
Yeah, who do you think's more likely that the senator is going to listen to? Especially because once they get in that position, they don't want to lose that position, 100%. Right? So it's just 100%. Like, it's really just... There's this big outcast, and like the system that we're currently operating in, whether you want to call that a democratic capitalism, right, or a democratic republic, whatever you want to call it, right, like democracy / capitalism really just kind of outcasts, and that centralization outcasts ability for outside perspectives to come in and for different ways of life to flourish, you know.
So that was like
that was a lot. That was a lot.
No, but I like it. And
yeah.
And I'm trying to like narrow it down to kind of exactly which components that covers, but it covers a lot of them.
Yeah.
Like, so like the components that are written here in front of me are work, pay, capital, profit, taxes, government, and democracy. And that kind of covers a lot of them. And I think the general idea that I kind of got from what you were saying is that, you know, when people can, if there's a possibility for a bottom line to want to be met, and for that bottom line to be prioritized over the good well-being of the public, that's when you think that centralization should be diminished, and this should be down to the people and the localization and you know, people that don't have bottom lines to allow the economy and for ultimately our entire nation to flourish. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, yeah, I would agree with that. For sure. I mean, I personally don't know enough about like when that point is, right?
Me neither.
I don't know enough, right? But I know it needs to happen, right? Because like the direction we're moving in, right? So things like, you know, wage and like, I mean, you've heard, it's as cliche as it sounds, everything is becoming more expensive, right? And it seems like life is only getting harder for normal people, right? And when you think that would be the complete opposite, right? We're progressing as a species. We're progressing. We have such great technology, right? I mean, you look at, like this is even, like I was saying this before in like a previous podcast, we're living like kings, right? But like suicide rates, mental health issues are through the roof nowadays, right? And it's higher than it's ever been, right? And so I think, you know, just the current society we're living in, especially, I forget who I was watching today. I think, oh God, I was Tucker Carlson, right? He's like, the normal average American in public, they're great people, right? Like, he's like, we just have bad people in power, right? Like bad people, like with corrupted interests. I mean, like I could get into this so much, but I just think like, I think the general public oftentimes, and you know, obviously I'm totally open to counter examples from this, and you know, like I definitely need to do more research, no doubt about it. But I think, you know, it really comes back down to like, who is representing us, right? Like, are these feeling? I am pro system, right? Like, I don't think I used to believe like, oh, I gotta escape the system, live on my own. Like, yeah, dude, okay, yeah, good luck with that growing your own food in 2023, dude. Like, there's no way, dude. Like, I mean, you definitely could, but it's very hard, you know. Like, you have to be a part of the system to some extent, right? I just think, especially nowadays, people just believe this democracy and democracy is great, you know, but I think a lot of times people just think capitalism is the only system that can be in place, and that's just the way things are, and they're not willing to change that, right? Change elements that introduce the gift economy, introduce these different types of elements, right? It's like I think they don't want things to change, because if things change, right, they wouldn't be able to make as much money, they wouldn't be able to make as much profit, right? And so things of that nature.
So I mean, that kind of ties into, you know, what the next point is that I'm going to cover, which is, you know, to give you a look at the diagram that is here and ask you what you think should be changed in this diagram to better explain your personal experience of capitalism and how it goes. And you know, tell me if I'm wrong, but the way that I'm looking at it now, it seems like, you know, over here somewhere, there would be something where it's either called bottom line or centralization of things that plays into business and production of value that in your eyes, based on what you're saying, seems like for the most part is corrupting businesses. Like the example you gave, like people can't be heard for issues that are actually relevant because other people are being heard because they're in bed with politicians or things of that nature.
Yeah, for sure.
So do you think that?
Yeah, I mean, like maybe like a vague thing like ethics or something like that, right? Like, and you know, we talked about this last time. You know, Yeah, definitely. Like, because what's on the left side there? It's
capital, government, labor.
Yeah, so capital, government, labor. Yeah, so capital, money, right? So government, you know, like obviously like regulation and things like that, and then labor, the individual person, right? That's working. Like, and I think like obviously, you know, the government, and I think a big distinction here, like morality and legality are separate, right? And so morality or legality is catching up to morality, right? And so you things look at like for instance, just to like give you an example, right? Like there was people that consciously thought slavery was wrong, right? But it didn't become abolished until like 1865, right? And so like morality, individuals, right, on their own personal level can say, yes, this is over, right? But it may take time in order for the legal system to catch up to that, right? So I think a bit, and like when governments pass, you know, laws and, you know, like statutes and things like that, like obviously not everything is a law, right? But like regulation takes time, right? Like it takes these different types of things. And I think a big component, and I think this about every issue, right, is in order for like the system to change, individuals' personal beliefs, values, how they view life, right, ideas have to be altered, right? So they really have to get to the root of this, right? And start to think for themselves, right? And so, like I said before, a lot of times people just believe this is the way things are. Like I was in that circumstance. I was in that kind of situation, right? But then they start to do different research. They start to see different examples, especially nowadays with the pandemic, with Ukraine, with all these different types of things. I'm not saying like these issues aren't real. I'm not saying they're hoaxes. I'm not saying like there's 100%. A lot of truth on both sides, right? Like totally understandable. But like once you really start, at least I believe, to develop a well-rounded perspective of things, and you start to like just to be open-minded about things rather than what is being spoon-fed to you by the media, by people that have been proven to have vested interests, right? Between, you know, the big business, the government, and the media, right? Like you can start to see that what they're saying may not have your best interest at hand, right? And so on that basis, we could start to have a collective movement that can really change the system. But I'm not sure if there's going to be enough time. So I think like, you know, that ethics aspect, or you could even say, I know it's like individual labor, right? Like when it comes to business, right? It's just, it's really about just being conscious of the decisions and actions we're making, right? And it's like, what is our goals? What is our goals when it comes to this stuff? Like, should we just be doing it for profit? Like, for instance, we have a sports videography business. I was thinking about this the other day. Like, should we introduce an environmental bottom line, right? Like when it comes to things like, should we be purchasing environmentally friendly batteries for our cameras? Like, you know, things like that. You know what I mean? Like, it's bringing that element into our aspect. Like, obviously, you know, a bottom line of our business is profit, right? It's like, but also too, we just need to take more things into consideration, right? And so I think if people start to do that, I think it has to be gradual, because if we just flipped it to like the environment, the economy would literally crash. And it's got to be slow, it's got to be gradual, but people got to be willing to make the changes. 100%. And I unfortunately don't believe I don't think it's going to happen, but you never know. That's
fair. So it seems like if you were to create a hypothetical, you know, addition to this diagram, it would be, you know, morality.
Yeah, morality, ethics, you know, and it's like, I mean, it's kind of like a rough area, you know, it's like, it's not necessarily, no, it's not necessarily like a concrete one that I'd add in there. Like, it's definitely be changed, but yeah, I'd probably add that in.
Cool. So, I mean, you know, the last part is to ask you, you know, ideas you have for making the system work better. And you kind of really have been touching on this the whole time, but I think I'd be interested to kind of get your, whether it's a summarization or, you know, just what your gut core instinct tells you is, you know, you know, from what you know, your best idea for how you would make the system work better. President Cow without corruption.
Dude, I don't know if I'd be much better. Like, see, that's the thing. Like,
me neither.
Yeah, like it's tough. It's tough. Like,
this is, you know,
local person's.
This is hypothetical.
Of course,
given the knowledge you know, idealistic world where everything's working out in the way that you're assuming it's working out. What are you doing?
Yeah, it's really just changing that bottom line, man. It's like I really like the idea of a triple bottom line, like, because that to me, it's like for instance, in one of my classes earlier this year, we had a certified B corporation, right? And so it's essentially it's like this external certification that companies get to show that they're, you know, hitting their triple bottom line, right? And so this external company comes in and checks this company to make sure they're meeting the external company's standards, right? And so it's like to me, it's like obviously business is very important, but I think a lot of times, like Russell Brand said this best. He's like 80% of products that are produced are completely needless, dude. It's like, and it introduces so many different aspects because like, we literally, I was thinking about this on my way to the gym, right? Like I was looking to my right and I saw like, where the Plainville movie theater is, right? And I was like, this used to be a forest, right? Like this used to be, like we've just commodified everything and we see no value in the earth. Like we see no, like we just think the earth is stupid. Like Alan Watts talks about this a lot, right? Like he just thinks, or a lot of people just think the earth is dumb, right? And so we think we human beings are separate from the earth, right? And so by us being separate from the earth, we have to overtake nature by the way we're creating things such as democracy, such as capitalism, like, right? Obviously, we need these things. Obviously, we need things and policies in place in order to have civilization, but I think it's just about like really just changing the system, right? Changing the system to be more in alignment with, I guess you could say, of a more locally, environmentally friendly kind of aspect where people are still able to do what they want, right, on a daily basis, but it's ultimately not used towards needless ends. Like I forget, I was in Dr. Good's class like a little while ago and last semester, and you just every single person I told you about this example. Did I? Maybe. But it was pretty much we watched a documentary on the Ladekis, right? And so the Ladekis it's like this Eastern culture, right? And so they every single person there was housed, right? Like every single person knew how to build a house, knew how to farm the land, knew how to do all these things. And so 20 years go by, and so Western civilization, culture, capitalism, and that type of, I guess you could say, business aspect of like, quote unquote needless products got introduced, right? And so their homeless population shot through the roof, right? And so I should say their previous economy, right, was a gift economy, right? And so everyone had their basic needs met. Every single person was fed, right, all year round, right? But now you go to things like a capitalistic system.
Can you
right?
explain what you mean by gift economy?
Yeah, gift economy. So essentially, like there's no dollar sign on products, right? Like you're not commodifying anything, right? And so from my understanding, it's based on exchange, right? So, for instance, if I give something to Jason, right, or if I give something to Jason, right, like that, or if he's like, oh, I really like that water bottle, right, like I'd be like, oh, here, take it, right, and so like the idea there is I will get, since at least in my understanding, it's a little rough. I gotta get a little rough up the edges, but you would receive that back in return, right? And so since like everything is yours in a sense, right? Like there's no privatization, right? In a sense, and it's not to say there's like a communist kind of thing where you're getting all your basic needs, and I'm not saying gift economy is perfect, right, by any means, but it's. You're mutually sharing these things, right? You're under one community rather than being separate and privatized. Gotcha. And so like the Ladekis, right, in that sense, like in this Eastern culture, right, their society completely flipped, right? Like there was no longer, these nice grass fields of, pasture where, people were out in the fields. They knew all these different types of things. People were smoking. People were doing drugs. Like all these different types of aspects were introduced to their culture, and it completely corrupted everything, right? There's now this homeless people everywhere, like, and compared to everyone having a home, now people don't have a home. Since like people don't have that home anymore, like, yeah, like the difference between the Ladekis, right, the gift economy and capitalistic system, there's just this kind of overall corruption that never really seems to be solved because we're just constantly consuming needless products, right? And so we're constantly just, our bottom line is profit. And at the end of the day, there's people just are all about themselves and not about others, right? And so it's just that big lack of care for others. And I think like just, obviously I'm covering a lot of different areas right now, and it's just like I'm not an expert in this by any means, but it's really just I believe like what I would do as a hypothetical president would really just try to change the priorities, really just see the value of the earth, see the value of like, look at things currently, see how they are, see how they can be changed, right, in a way that can benefit normal people, right, where they can just, genuinely live their lives according to their own values, their own like philosophies do what they want, right? But at the same time, too, we're all moving towards one collective goal. And I think a lot of times, capitalism, business, right, just really, there's so many great aspects of it. And, it's allowing us to do what we are currently doing. And it's going to allow us to, like, have our own business, have our own life, right? But I think at the end of the day, it's like, and this is kind of something that I feel about a lot, it just kind of disconnects us from each other and from the earth. And I think that's just a big aspect that I think of is lacking right now. And I think it could definitely be improved.
Well, I like it. To finish this off, I thought of this as you were speaking. Describe your experience, not your ideal, but your experience of capitalism with one word.
That's a good one.
The reason why I ask is because, I'm looking at it from a neutral perspective of, how good would your life be if you were in a communist society, right? Because you grew up and you're greatly benefiting, as am I, from a capitalist society. Granted, it's not only because of capitalism. You can't you can't give all the credit to it, but you can't give no credit to it. But then again, there's also plenty of negative side effects of, the way that this system has been working. So if you had to use one word to describe your feeling of your experience, what would that be?
Vague.
Okay. Hey, that's a good answer.
Honestly, vague. Because,
answer.
It has benefited me in a lot of ways, right? But, are we actually living in a capitalistic system, right? Like, are we actually living in a society like that? Like, a lot of people think, like, it's capitalism with a mask of an oligarchy, right? And just, like, things like that.
Right.
So, it personally, like, it's never been terrible to me, but, like, from my research, it says otherwise, so.
Fair.
Yeah.
All right, handsome man.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening, if you're listening, to episode 83 of the Conscious Cast, with your host Jason Skillet.
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, that's it from me. Any last words for the listeners?
Time to go to Olive Garden.
Time to go to Olive Garden, ladies and gentlemen. Love yourself because I love you.
Stay handsome.
And we're clocking out, people.
Peace.
Peace.
Nice.
Well done.